Let's bring Scott Grayson in and get his thoughts, Grayson's grades here on the Sports Bash. All right, Scott, number one, the mood in the locker room yesterday. You've been in a lot of I feel like we've had you on over the years and inside some bad losses. Tennessee comes to mind last year. You can start rattling them off. But yesterday, the mood in that locker room losing to Miami was what?
Honestly, I expected to see more anger. I expected some of what the Cowboys had, quite frankly, after their loss on Thursday from what we saw, with yelling in the locker room. I expected there to be something, and it was almost, I guess I'll go with shock. Just a lot of lifeless emotion, really. I mean, it was almost like they couldn't believe what happened, which I think is where the Eagles fans were. But, really the players I thought were honestly, it's starting to sound like a broken record. You hear a lot of these guys saying the same things over and over again, and I'll start with, the number one guy on the team who's most looked at and most criticized or most praised, and that's the quarterback. Carson Wentz, how many times are you going to say, I got to look myself in the mirror, I got to figure this out? A lot of the guys have all said that, and quite frankly, yesterday it was more of that same thing, and I think, you're just seeing some of these guys are just going to the same thoughts. And I think, quite frankly, the emotion probably didn't come out until those guys were, back on the plane. And honestly, we'll see what they do with it. But, I walked in the locker room and I expected to see and hear some emotion. It was quiet. You didn't hear guys doing much other than, quite frankly, everybody was sort of waiting around for Alshon Jeffrey to speak. And he kind of took his time to kind of make his way over to the shower. And while he was there, Miles Sanders and Jay Ajayi were sitting there, and Miles was, kind of straight-faced, but Ajayi was sitting there just kind of chuckling and laughing and kind of saying things kind of very, quiet that you couldn't really hear what he was saying, but to Miles Sanders, it got him laughing a little bit, and I thought, okay, here's the first guy who's kind of like, yeah, this is ridiculous. I can't believe this happened, and I took it like Ajayi was like, screw this. Why am I even here? They didn't even give me the ball. And, nobody wanted it more than him probably down there in Miami.
It's interesting. I remember a couple times over the years, people would come on and talk about how much of a leader a guy like LeGarrette Blount was. Chris Long, those guys. Blunt's no longer here. Long's no longer here. You wonder if one by one, peeling those guys off and, coming up with Miles Sanders, a rookie, and you see Long is out and you brought younger guys in, like if those things start to take their toll.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think I have never felt more like this team needed to be blown up at this point than I do now. The older guys, it's clear that it's time to turn the page. I feel like this team's getting passed by. And look, I'll say this, too. I think that in terms of, you talked about the timeout situation. I put that in my I couldn't believe it in the time I'm sitting there watching it. When they split wide, I'm thinking, Doug's going to call a timeout here. And he didn't. And I think that's a rookie mistake that you shouldn't have from a guy who's won a Super Bowl. And I think, honestly, Doug won't admit it. I would be surprised if he did. But I think he thought they were just doing that to show it, trying to get the Eagles to burn a timeout. And I think he thought they're not really going to run a play here. And they did. And honestly, quite frankly, it could have been the biggest play of the game. And, that's one of those times. And I'm thinking Doug at this point after that loss, whatever kind of clout and goodwill he had built up with the fans up to this point from winning the Super Bowl, it's back now to like, okay, we're done. This has to get fixed. And I think the eyes are squarely on him. It's on him now to fix this team. And I don't think he feels that way. I think he, some of the things he's saying, some of the ways he's acting, it's just like, hey, it's just another week and we got to go put our best foot forward, as he said today. And the leaders yesterday were saying, well, this is on the leaders and we've got to get this team going. Well, at some point, somebody's got to step up and really take leadership, whether it's Doug, whether it's Carson, whether it's Malcolm, whether it's Brandon, whoever, and say, this is and call out the team, quite frankly. I think that's some of what I was looking for yesterday, and there wasn't any of that in the locker room.
Sometimes, Scott, I think that as stubborn as Doug can be about how things are going to get better, and at least he has a track record a little bit to prove it, Jim Schwartz, who you also gave an F to, your first sentence really sums up, I think, what a lot of people have frustrations with him is that he's stubborn even when it's not working. And I thought to myself after the second big Devontae Parker play, all right, you know what? For the rest of the game, this is the only guy that's going to beat me. I'm just going to make sure I'm shadowing him bracket. I'm not going to leave him alone. I can still play certain schemes that I like, but I'm going to have this guy surrounded, and he did not at all. And you wrote that. You wrote that he did not make adjustments to match what the Dolphins did in the second half, and that is shocking to me. There's one guy on that team that could beat him, and he continuously let him do it.
Well, it's funny you brought him up. I watched him walk through the locker room, and he walked through slowly, and I was trying to think about how I would sum up the way he looked stone-faced. His eyes, he just looked puzzled as he walked through the locker room, and I thought, what the Dolphins did to me, you could tell that there was some sort of conversation by that coaching staff at halftime that says, we have to do this, we have to try this. Clearly Fitzpatrick was being sacked, harassed, hit all over the place in the first half. It didn't happen at all in the second half. Well, why is that? Because the Eagles just decided not to rush anymore? No, they were still doing the same stuff. It was the same stuff, and the Dolphins had a plan to counteract it. And you don't see that kind of adjustment ever, I feel like, from this team. Perhaps even on both sides of the ball. I mean, you look at what happened yesterday. You go up 28-14. Isn't, Andy Reid, here, you'd want to talk about a guy from the past. Andy Reid would say, we've got to shorten the game. We've got to run the ball, move the chains, make the clock run down, and keep the limit and limit the number of possessions the opponent would get. And the Eagles had 19 run plays against the 31st rushing defense in the league. And I realized I've gotten off of Jim Schwartz here, but that's one side of it. And the other side of the equation is, Schwartz does not – he feels his corners need to be big boys. And you've seen this throughout the countless corners that have been here, that have come and gone, the Nolan Carrolls, the so on. They can't turn around and play the ball. They all want to stay on their guy. And meanwhile, he's jumping over you and catching the ball for a huge gain. And it never changes. So clearly that's a coaching problem.
It's something that Seth Joyner brought up last night on the postgame about he feels that the secondary coach for X amount of years has been doing a terrible job, that these guys don't have the right skill set and they're not coached properly in that secondary.
I think that's becoming painfully obvious because it is, like I just said, it doesn't matter who's there. They're playing the ball. Well, they're playing the receiver the same way. They're not playing the ball. And that is what leads to those costly pass interference calls. It's so much easier for an official to throw that flag if he can tell you're not even playing the ball. And that killed them late in the game. And, that's what Devontae Parker was keying on. Somebody obviously did their homework and realized these guys aren't going to turn around and play the ball. And it wasn't just Parker. It was Mike Gesicki as well in the end zone over Jalen Mills a couple times. The guys are not turning around and playing the football. They're just staying on the man and thinking, if I'm here, I don't know what they're thinking. Or they must be coached up to play that way because, like you said, and like I said, these guys are doing the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's Nolan Carroll or any of the other corners who've been there, any of the guys who've been playing while these other guys have been hurt. They're doing the same thing. They're just not turning around to play the ball, and you're not getting the interceptions, you're not getting the turnovers. And quite frankly, it's leading to these either penalties or big completions.
Scott, Carson Wentz was criticized a ton. We all know how much he was talked about after last week's loss. And, you're going into this Miami game and just to backpedal to the stubbornness of Doug Peterson, I would have to say that with the benefit of hindsight, Doug heard all of the Carson noise, and he said, we're going down to Miami against an atrocious team that doesn't even care if they win the game. And I want Carson to go out there and sling it and hopefully calm down this storm of critics. So you gave him a grade of a B. He was much better than he was last week. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, he was better, but, the one that passes that kind of burn in my head are the deep balls that he's supposed to be pretty good at throwing at. He did have Alshon open, and he missed them. And I think you might be right a little bit about trying to get Peterson trying to get Wentz going against a poor defense. But, Wentz to me needs somebody in this offseason to get back to him on his mechanics. His arm drops, his passes sail high. There is a lack of consistency. His footwork is not even going. You see a lot. You remember Peyton Manning? It was almost obnoxious. He would sit in a pocket and his feet would keep moving. When Carson back in 2017 was having a good season, he was keeping his feet moving, even if he was still looking and settled in the pocket. There's none of that anymore. And they try to do these designed rollouts occasionally. Sometimes I think that's a good idea. Sometimes I think Wentz hurries his throws. But Wentz mechanically is lost right now, and I think that he did make some good passes. He threw some balls that I thought shouldn't have been thrown that were caught in traffic. And some of that, okay, he's going to thread a needle, fine. But, his mechanics to me need to get addressed. And it's something you can fix within a week of the season. That's something that won't be able to be touched and try to be addressed till after the season. And, I know less football than Doug Peterson has forgotten. And he has to see that mechanically Wentz is not sound. But that's something that they've got to get through. And I think you might be right a little bit that he saw an opportunity to get Wentz going. But you talked about some of the great quarterbacks in the game these days, leaders who've been in the league multiple years. Aaron Rodgers, let's go. Tom Brady, of course. You throw those guys in the mix. What would they do after their team has lost 3 games in a row? Would they stand up and keep saying, I got to look myself in the mirror? And this is not who I think Carson Wentz is, and I think it's something he's going to have to try to find to be if he wants to be an NFL franchise quarterback, is to call out people and call out the team and stand up. And that's something that he isn't doing, and he didn't do yesterday. He hasn't done. I don't know that he would do because he's that good guy from North Dakota State. But I think that's something that he also needs to try to find, is a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And we'll see. Maybe he will find some of that. Maybe it'll carry out. It's something he does behind the scenes and does out on the field. But mechanically, he's lost.
Grayson's grades are posted right now at 97.3ESPN.com. They play the Giants on Monday night. And, of course, Grayson's grades will be back next week on a Tuesday edition of the Sports Bash. Thanks, Scott.
All right, thanks, guys.
And Scott Grayson, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.